Welcome to Fantasy Audiobook. Chapter 16. Fight the Gildarts. Don't fight. Don't fight. Oh, the rookies these days are all monsters. In the empty cave, a voice of vicissitudes echoed in the cave. Following the sound of this voice, a figure slowly walked out of the dark corner. I saw this figure folded his hands on his chest, with a half smile on his face, and he didn't care that he had been discovered. You are the examiner. Frowning, looking at the figure in front of him, Luo Zhen said in surprise. Let me introduce myself. My name is Gildarts, a fairy tales level mage. I am the guardian of the 10th flag. If you want to get the 10th flag from me, you must first let me admit you. Nodding his head, the middle-aged man pointed to the red flag not far away and said with a smile. Luo Zhen nodded slightly. The next moment, Luo Zhen's figure instantly disappeared from Gildarts' sight, turning into an afterimage and rushing towards the red flag. Frowning, Gildarts disappeared, and the moment Luo Zhen appeared in front of the flag, he raised his fist and smashed Luo Zhen's back. Knowing that it would be uncomfortable to take this punch forcefully, Luo Zhen didn't dare to hold on. He dodged and fled from the vicinity of the flag, looking at Gildarts with serious eyes. Hey, young people can't be so lacking in martial arts. Looking at the solemn Luo Zhen, Gildarts felt helpless. It never occurred to him that Luo Zhen's first thought was to take the flag and run away first. Shrugging, Luo Zhen didn't think there was anything wrong with what he did. Helplessly said, Uncle, I can't beat you, so I have no choice but to do this. Gildarts smiled, and said to Luo Zhen, there is one more thing I forgot to tell you. Even if you take off the flag, it's useless. Before I admit you, it will be invalid. Looking at Gildarts' confident smile, Luo Zhen also knew that this battle was inevitable. Sighing, his eyes sharpened instantly. Then come on. Drinking lightly, Luo Zhen stared at Gildarts with vigilance in his eyes. Gildarts adhered to the concept of his predecessors. With one hand behind his back, he stretched out his right hand and hooked Luo Zhen's palm. Boom. The sound of the explosion echoed in the empty cave, and the stones under Luo Zhen's feet burst instantly, spreading like a spider web. Luo Zhen, who appeared in front of Gildarts in an instant, clenched his fists and punched Gildarts directly in the face. Gildarts reached out to block, fist bumping on the arm. Gildarts' expression darkened involuntarily. He shook his arm and looked at Luo Zhen in surprise. Such a strong force. Uncle, you have to be serious. Grinning, a raging flame and a dark cloud appeared behind Luo Zhen. Thunder and lightning roared, flames roared. Thunder continued to bombard, blasting towards Gildarts' figure. Prometheus kept spitting out fireballs, and the scorching heat swept over, quickly turning the entire cave into a sea of flames. Luo Zhen pulled out Napoleon from his waist. The jet-black blade shone brightly under the light of the fire. He raised his sword and fought with Gildarts hand to hand. During the fight, Gildarts became more and more surprised. This young man seemed to be able to predict every attack he would make, and every time he could dodge his attack without any risk. And seize the gap between your own attacks to fight back. Suddenly, Gildarts suddenly felt dizzy and his movements froze slightly. At this moment's pause, Luo Zhen directly cut out a sword. The fierce sword energy instantly chopped towards Gildarts' neck. Relieved, Gildarts' complexion darkened due to the sword aura so close at hand. His eyes also became serious. With a wave of his right hand towards the front, the sword energy that was close at hand shattered instantly. It turned into streaks of fragmented sword energy and shot towards the surroundings. The sword energy blasted on the surrounding stone walls, making a huge roar. The smoke and dust dissipated, and the stone wall was covered with dense slashes. Prometheus and Zeus floating beside Luo Zhen slowly descended, and their ferocious faces appeared in Gildarts' sight. He reached out and grabbed Prometheus beside him, and attached it to Napoleon in his hand. In an instant, the blade became extremely narrow and long. Emperor sword. Broken blade. Luo Zhen jumped up and stood on the body of Zeus and rose in the air. Surrounded by incomparable flames, Napoleon in his hand slashed out with a sword. Slashed a sword with raging flames, and the scorching heat swept over. With a shocking explosion, Gildarts stepped out from the smoke. The clothes on his body were a little torn, and his eyes were very excited. Looking at Luo Zhen, he muttered to himself, President, you really summoned a monster this time. As he spoke, he rushed straight to Luo Zhen, completely ignoring the oncoming flames and thunder. At Luo Zhen's feet, Gildarts jumped up and rushed straight to Luo Zhen. Crush. Appearing in front of Luo Zhen, Gildarts' palm suddenly touched Zeus's body. Boom. With a bang, Zeus under Luo Zhen's feet suddenly exploded. It turned into countless small dark clouds scattered around. Luo Zhen fell to the sky and became serious when he saw the countless Zeus. Have you finally used magic? My magic is super magic, shattering magic, capable of shattering everything I touch, including humans. Gildarts raised his arm and smiled at Luo Zhen. Is that why you told me your details? Putting away the long knife, Luo Zhen asked Gildarts with a smile. After waving his hands, Gildarts said indifferently, I've already admitted you, go and get the flag. Looking at Gildarts, who suddenly stopped fighting, Luo Zhen was a little surprised for a while. But seeing Gildarts' half-smile look, Luo Zhen felt that things were not that simple. Sure enough, the moment Luo Zhen was about to take off the flag, a thunderbolt blasted not far away in an instant, and exploded directly beside Luo Zhen. At the moment when the thunder and lightning struck Luo Zhen, the dark cloud that split into countless small Zeus gathered and blocked Luo Zhen. Swallow this thunder in one gulp. Bursts of blue smoke spewed out of his mouth, and he stared fiercely at the place where the thunder came from. Hey, you little brat is playing tricks like this, aren't you? Chapter 17. Hey, you little brat, do you know how to do this sneak attack? Zeus' ferocious face was full of anger, his white body became as black as ink, and traces of lightning flashed in Zeus' body. Yin Tessa's voice echoed in the empty cave. Not far away, Prometheus also floated in front of Luo Zhen, and the raging flames soared into the sky, like the cheeks of the devil in hell emerging from the flames. Put down the flag. The figures of Ligurthas and Freed walked out of a hole not far away. Ligurthas, who was wearing a coat, didn't pay attention to Zeus and Prometheus at all, and stared at Luo Zhen with his eyes. Luo Zhen stood up and pulled Prometheus and Zeus in front of him to the sides. Master, leave this guy to us. Pulled aside by Luo Zhen, Zeus said with anger in his voice, staring at Legasus viciously. Luo Zhen didn't speak, with a faint smile on his cheek. The next moment, Luo Zhen's figure instantly appeared in front of Ligurthas. The clenched fist punched out, and went straight to Ligurthas's face. Accompanied by a loud noise, Ligurthas's figure flew upside down and slammed heavily on the wall behind him. We're even. Glancing at Freed at the side, Luo Zhen rubbed his wrist and said calmly. After speaking, Luo Zhen turned around and walked towards the flag. Asshole. Thunder surged on the shattered stone wall, and Ligurthas rushed out of the pile of rubble. There was a red fist mark on his face, and the somewhat embarrassed look made Gildarts, who was not far away, wanted to laugh. Gildarts crossed his arms and sat in a corner watching the scene. When he fought against Luo Zhen, he knew that Ligurthas could not be Luo Zhen's opponent. Leave it to the three of you. He pulled out the long knife at his waist and threw it into the air. Suddenly a human face appeared on the sharp blade. Yes, my master. With a ferocious smile, the flaming Prometheus floated in the air. Fire from the sky. Bursts of flames sprayed out from the mouth, blasting towards Ligurthas and Freed. Zeus was not idle either. His pitch-black body was floating in the air. The thunder kept pouring down, and the moment the fireball hit the ground, it exploded. The figures of Ligurthas and Freed dodged, constantly avoiding the attacks of Zeus and Prometheus in the air. The next moment, a blade of light flashed in front of Ligurthas's eyes, and it slashed straight at Ligurthas's chest. Not good. The expression of Freed in the distance changed, and his fingers gestured in the air in front of him. Steel. The next moment, a piece of steel suddenly appeared in front of Ligurthas, blocking Napoleon's slash. The steel was cut in two, and the slashes that still had power continued to attack Lagos's. But Ligurthas, who was already prepared, easily avoided the attack. Napoleon gave Freed a vicious look, turned his head and killed Freed. Napoleon, give me this opponent. At this time, Urza stood out in armor and stood in front of Napoleon. Looking sharply at Freed in front of him, he held a long sword and said. Looking at Luo Zhen in the distance, after seeing Luo Zhen nodding, Napoleon continued to hide, waiting for the opportunity to give Ligurthas a fatal blow. Damn it, you just let these things hold me back, don't you dare to confront me head on. Constantly dodging the attacks of Zeus and Prometheus, Lycurgus felt annoyed. He roared at Luo Zhen, who was sitting next to the flag in the distance. Although it can devour Zeus's thunder, his attack is completely ineffective against Zeus and Prometheus. He also tried to fight back, but the attack had no effect on them at all. In this world, there is no armed domineering and yellow spring fruit. Except for those who use soul magic, there are very few people who can deal with homies. Luo Zhen crossed his arms and looked at the fleeing Logoses with great interest. He chuckled and said, "If you can't even pass them, what qualifications do you have to be my opponent?" Damn it. Hearing Luo Zhen's flat voice beside his ear, Lycurgus felt annoyed in his heart. The roar of the thunder dragon. With a sudden break, he stopped abruptly, and Lycurgus put his right hand on the ground. There is thunder in his mouth. The next moment, a breath full of lightning spewed out of Lycurgus's mouth, directly attacking Zeus and Prometheus in the air. Zeus' body swelled in midair, and he opened his mouth wide to swallow the gushing thunder. Lycurgus's complexion was dark. Looking at Zeus, who had received his breath without mistake, he was constantly thinking about countermeasures in his mind. Unexpectedly, Zeus could also eat his own lightning. Zeus' body was created from a real thundercloud, and its power was unimaginable. Shock you lay. Zeus' body swelled enormously, and rumbling thunder continued to roar in his body. Accompanied by a loud explosion, a thunderbolt as thick as a bucket descended from the sky, blasting towards Logoses in an instant. Bastard! Don't underestimate me. With anger on his face, Lycurgus stomped on the ground and jumped straight up. He grabbed the bucket-thick thunderbolt with both hands and stuffed it into his mouth. You are not the only one who eats lightning. Lycurgus roared angrily, swallowing this bolt of thunder into his stomach. A grin appeared on his face. Full strength is back. Stupid. Let me do it. Prometheus on the side saw this scene and knew that Zeus could not fight Lycurgus. Stepping forward to squeeze Zeus' body away, the flames on his body became more and more turbulent. Stolen fire. Prometheus rushed forward, and a flash of fire streaked across the sky. Under the extremely fast dive, Prometheus' body turned into a pillar of fire, rushing towards Logoses. Thunder Dragon's collapsing fist. Unavoidable, Lycurgus gathered lightning on his fist, ready to head with Prometheus. When the pillar of fire collided with the thunder, Lycurgus' figure stepped back a few steps. Prometheus flew upside down and hit Luo Zhen's side heavily. Prometheus was frightened and angry, and the flames on his body became more violent. Zeus, Napoleon, come back too. Seeing that Prometheus was about to step forward after being repelled, Luo Zhen stretched out his hand to stop him. At the same time, he yelled at Zeus, who kept sending down thunder, and Napoleon, who was hiding. Hearing Luo Zhen's voice, Zeus gave Lycurgus a fierce look, and then returned to Luo Zhen unwillingly. Chapter 18. You are finally willing to make a move. Seeing Luo Zhen drink away Zeus and Prometheus, Lycurgus's eyes were full of fighting spirit, and the lightning flashed on Lycurgus's body. The two fists collided, and a flash of thunder roared between the fists. Luo Zhen smiled, completely ignoring the high-spirited Logoses. Suddenly, Luo Zhen's complexion became calm. Accompanied by the violent explosion, Lycurgus's pupils shrank sharply. Luo Zhen's figure disappeared directly from his sight. Not far away, Gildarts shook his head and said boringly, it's over, go home. Standing up and stretching, he no longer watched the outcome of this battle. The figure of Lycurgus quickly retreated to the corner of the stone wall, scanning the surroundings vigilantly, trying to find the figure of Luo Zhen. The next moment, Luo Zhen appeared in front of Lycurgus. Lycurgus's pupils constricted violently, and he wanted to raise his arms and put them on himself. Too late. A calm voice echoed in my ears. A sharp pain appeared in the stomach along with the sound. Luo Zhen clenched his fist, and punched Lycurgus heavily in the stomach. The violent impact directly shattered the stone wall behind him. Lycurgus rolled his eyes white, and collapsed on the ground powerlessly. Not far away, Urza was struggling to fend off Fried's attack. Urza, who has awakened to magic for less than half a year now, is no match for Fried at all. The violent explosion echoed in the cave. Fried glanced this way and saw Lycurgus on the ground rolling his eyes. Fried was startled, and shouted at the figure of Lycurgus lying on the ground, Lycurgus, are you okay? Stop screaming, He's passed out and won't wake up. Scratching his head, Luo Zhen yawned. Watching Urza's battle between the two of them was difficult to tell the winner for a while. Although Fried was able to fight against Urza, but because of the defeat of Ligurses, Fried could not calm down and fight Urza seriously. Okay, let's all stop, you lose. Just when Urza was sent flying by Fried, Luo Zhen stood up, came to Fried, and said calmly. Looking at Ligurses who fell to the ground and passed out completely, although Fried was not reconciled, he also silently accepted the consequences. Facing Luo Zhen, he bowed slightly, and then passed by Luo Zhen's side, helping the fainted Lagoses to walk out of the cave. Call. Looking at the backs of the two leaving, Luo Zhen asked Urza, who was out of breath, "Are you all right?" Urza shook his head, and said in a depressed mood, "I'm not his opponent." "How long have you learned to use magic? You will definitely be very strong in the future." Luo Zhen stretched out his palm and rubbed Urza's little head, took off the 10th flag and moved on. Since Gildarts didn't tell himself that the assessment was over, it meant that there was still an assessment ahead. Sitting on the back of Zeus, he quickly interspersed in the cave. A light appeared in the distance, and Zeus turned to Luo Zhen and said, "Master, there is an exit ahead." Luo Zhen raised his head, looked at the approaching light and sat up straight. The figure of Zeus rushed out, and there was a vast ocean outside. Came directly to the back of the island. This exit is connected to a cliff. The moment Zeus rushed out of the cave, there was a loud rumbling sound above his head. He turned his head and looked behind him. I saw pieces of rubble falling over the entrance of the cave, completely blocking the entrance of the cave. Luo Zhen was also a little confused for a while. What was the final assessment? At this time, Urza suddenly pointed to the collapsed stone pile and shouted, "Look, what's there?" Look in the direction Urza is pointing. There is a note on top of the stone. I saw that it was written on the note. Luo Zhen, you should have come to the end, so now the final assessment begins. The final assessment is to return to Magnolia from here. We have already taken a step ahead, let's go. At the end of the note, Carlos the horse deliberately left a mischievous smile on his face. Luo Zhen's face darkened. Looking at the note in his hand, he couldn't laugh or cry. Looking at the text on the note, Urza didn't react for a while, and asked Luo Zhen, "What does the president mean? Did he leave us?" Shrugging, Luo Zhen said helplessly, "The assessment is over, we passed." This final assessment is actually a bad taste of the horseman Carlos. No matter who the final passer is, Carlos must have left long ago. After thinking about it, Luo Zhen said to Zeus below him, "Let's go back to the place where we went to the island before." After getting the order, Zeus immediately said loudly, "Understood, master." As he said that, he speeded up and rushed straight to the place on the island. Sure enough, the boat that Carlos had sent them to had already left. Where they came to the island, a small boat stayed there. On the boat, Ligurthas and Fried, who had already woken up, looked at the boat with puzzled faces. Especially Ligurthas, who looked at the ship in front of him with a dark face. "Hey, do you want a ride?" Asking Zeus to stop, Luo Zhen sat cross-legged on Zeus's body, and shouted at Legasus and Fried on the beach. Looking up at Zeus in the sky, Ligursus snorted coldly, and Tsunere turned his head. "Ligursus, let's go back with them." Seeing Lagos's Tsunere turn his head away, Fried hastily persuaded him from the sidelines. After struggling for a while, Ligursus finally compromised. Let the reluctant Zeus descend and stop on the sand. Just when the two of Ligursus were about to step on Zeus, Luo Zhen suddenly said to Ligursus, "I can give you a ride, but I have one condition." Hearing this, Ligursus suddenly became furious, and shouted to Luo Zhen, "Don't think that I can't go back without you, I won't sit down." As he spoke, he turned to get on the boat. Fried quickly persuaded Ligursus. Because of the fight with Luo Zhen, Ligursus' body was already injured. Coupled with being a dragon slayer, it is difficult for Ligursus to adapt to transportation. "Tell me, what are the conditions?" With a dark face, under Fried's persuasion, Ligursus asked Luo Zhen reluctantly. "It's not an excessive request, but when you are in the guild, you can feed Zeus some lightning when you have time." Luo Zhen grinned and pointed to Zeus below him. Chapter 19. It's not an excessive condition. Usually when you are in the guild, just feed this guy some lightning. Luo Zhen grinned, pointed to Zeus under him and said. "Just, that's it." Hearing Luo Zhen's request, Legerses was stunned. It's not that the conditions proposed by Luo Zhen are excessive, on the contrary, they are a bit too simple. That's it. Luo Zhen nodded and looked at Legerses with a chuckle. After a moment of silence, Legerses nodded and agreed. That's all right, let's go. Giving room to Legerses and Fried, Zeus reluctantly took the four of them home. Zeus was very fast, and it didn't take long to return to Magnolia. When they came to the gate of the guild, Legerses and Fried jumped down and pushed open the gate of the guild in embarrassment. In the guild, Carlos the horse smiled, and when he saw Legerses walking in, the smile on his face froze immediately. Looking at the figure of Legerses, Ma Karloff stood up straight, and asked Legerses curiously, Legerses, did you pass the test? Logically speaking, it shouldn't be. He knew the strength of Legerses best, and it was impossible for him to pass the examination under Luo Zhen's hands. Legerses shook his head, pointed to Luo Zhen who walked in from the door, and said, this guy passed. Seeing that there was no sign of resignation on Legerses's face, Carlos the horse nodded in satisfaction. Being able to accept failure is also a good thing. The eyes of everyone in the guild fell on Luo Zhen, and following Carlo the horseman strode up to Luo Zhen. Loudly announced. Starting today, Luo Zhen Dickasis has become another S-rank mage in our fairy tale. Oh, congratulations, Luo Zhen. I knew that Luo Zhen must have passed the examination. Great Luo Zhen. As the horse Carlo's voice fell, everyone in the guild cheered. The shouts of the crowd resounded through the sky. Seeing Carlo the groom standing in front of him and the lazy Gildarts on the bar not far away, Luo Zhen also had a smile on his face. Luo Zhen, congratulations. Standing in front of Luo Zhen, Ma Carlos had a smile on his face, and said with a smile on his loving face. President, I will carry the title of fairy tale on my back, and I will not disappoint this coat of arms. Raising his arm, pointing to the emblem of fairy tale on the inside of his forearm, Luo Zhen said with a serious expression. Fairy tale's name and whatnot, go to him. Look for your respective paths and move forward, this is fairy tale. Come on, let's become S-rank mages for Luo Zhen, come to the banquet. Ma Karloff cheered and shouted to everyone in the guild. Oh, the banquet is on. Come on Luo Zhen, let's play together. Being pulled into the crowd, Luo Zhen had a rare indulgence. At night, Luo Zhen shook his dizzy head. Urza helped Luo Zhen walk towards home. Seeing that Luo Zhen's face was a little ugly, Urza couldn't help but complain to Luo Zhen, really, you are obviously not yet an adult, how can you drink? Our Urza is really becoming more and more like a good wife. Urza's complaining words echoed in his ears, and the corners of Luo Zhen's mouth couldn't help but twitch. After Luo Zhen's voice fell, Urza suddenly fell silent. With his head down, he supported Luo Zhen and walked towards home. Where Luo Zhen couldn't see, Urza's face was flushed, and his eyes were full of confusion. Back home, Urza ran out after sending Luo Zhen back to the room. Seeing the back of Urza disappearing in the blink of an eye, Luo Zhen couldn't help shaking his head and chuckling. Spring goes and autumn comes, and 2 years are fleeting. In the second year after Luo Zhen became an S-level mage, Legerses passed the S-level mage assessment and became an S-level mage. During the 2 years, Luo Zhen also met many characters that appeared in the original novel. Although most of them are supporting roles, the template of Whitebeard has been increased to 50%, and the ability of shaking fruit has been obtained. On this day, Luo Zhen was lying on Zeus' body, floating gently in the air. Soon, the silhouette of Magnolia appeared in front of her. Master, we will be at the guild soon. With the breeze caressing his face, Zeus spoke softly to Luo Zhen on his back. Luo Zhen put his hands behind his head. The gentle sunlight shone on Luo Zhen's body. He lazily opened his eyes, and closed them again because of some dazzling eyes. Standing at the door of the guild, even if the door is not opened, the noisy voice has already reached the ears. Really, I haven't been back for so long, why is it still like this? Reluctantly pushing open the door, there was another noisy scene in the guild. Yo, hello everyone. Luo Zhen who pushed open the door smiled and waved to everyone who stopped. The sound of the door being pushed open caught the attention of everyone in the guild. Looking at the familiar yet somewhat unfamiliar figure, everyone immediately cheered. Luo Zhen, you're back. Welcome home. Luo Zhen. And Zeus, Prometheus, Napoleon, welcome home. Seeing Luo Zhen's taller figure, everyone rushed forward and gathered around Luo Zhen. Asking Luo Zhen how this mission is going. Stop. Seeing that everyone was surrounding him, Luo Zhen quickly stretched out his hand to stop everyone from asking. Wiping the sweat off his forehead, he smiled at everyone and said, "Is the president in the guild? I'll report the details of the commission to the president first, and then I'll catch up with everyone." The president was summoned by the Senate again. It seems that it is because of Luo Zhen. Hearing that Luo Zhen wanted to find the president, Gray, who was standing aside, said with a snicker. "Ha, my business." Luo Zhen scratched his head, but didn't realize what happened to him. "It's not that you went too far in the commissioning process and smashed a mountain to pieces." Seeing the puzzled look on Luo Zhen's face, Gray immediately shouted at Luo Zhen. Spreading his hands helplessly, Luo Zhen said, "But that monster is too big, I couldn't control the strength, and even the mountain and the monster were shattered together." As expected of Luo Zhen. Destroying a mountain is as easy as kicking over a small mound. Too strong, Luo Zhen. I've decided, I'm going to target Luo Zhen. Forget it. Thank God if you can be half as strong as Luo Zhen. Those who use TikTok almost forgot to update, Muggle. Chapter 20. Luo Zhen found a seat at the bar and sat down, and the members of the guild gathered around Luo Zhen, listening to some things that Luo Zhen encountered in the commission. Looking at the curious eyes of everyone, Luo Zhen did not hesitate to tell his own story, and shared with them some interesting things he encountered in the commission. I don't know how long it has passed, Carlos the horse returned to the guild. Seeing the guild members gathered around the bar one after another, he was a little puzzled. How could his asshole Carlo not know about these people in his own guild? They have to quarrel in the guild every day, and the only one who can calm them down is Urza. Curiously, he squeezed into the crowd, and immediately saw Luo Zhen sitting on the bar counter and telling stories vividly. As soon as he saw Luo Zhen, Mrs. Carlo became angry. Squeezing into the crowd and jumping onto the bar, Mrs. Carlos yelled at Luo Zhen and asked, "You brat. Why did you make such a big commotion during the entrustment again?" Raising his head to glance at the groom Carlo, Luo Zhen stood up with a smile and put down the wine bottle in his hand. Putting his hands under the horse's ribs, he picked him up. "Ah, it's the president. Long time no see, I miss you so much." Being hugged by Luo Zhen with his hands under his ribs and held up over his head, the stable Carlo was instantly annoyed. Shouting at Luo Zhen, "You brat. Show me some respect, I'm the president." As he said that, he was about to reach out and beat Luo Zhen's head, but he couldn't touch Luo Zhen because of his short hands. His face flushed red with anger. Luo Zhen had had enough of seeing the flailing Mr. Carlo. He put it on the bar and asked Mr. Carlo, "President, I haven't seen you for so long, why are you yelling as soon as we meet?" It was agreed to be a family in our guild, who would yell at the long-lost family when they meet. Obviously it was Luo Zhen's own fault, but a burst of words came out, leaving Mrs. Carlos speechless. "That's right, President, why are you like this? President, you are wrong. It can't be like this in the future." The words of the surrounding guild members kept getting into the ears of Carlo the horse, making Carlo the horse flushed. Not because of shyness, but because of anger. "You bastards, don't think that you have nothing to do. These are all complaints from the council, all because of you." Ma Carlos was furious, and he took out a thick stack of papers from his arms, and yelled at everyone. "Go away. It's gone. Let's do a commission." Seeing that Mrs. Carlo was angry, and that he and others were about to get angry, everyone turned their heads and left. Talked and laughed with the companions around me and left. Call. Letting out a foul breath, Carlos the horse grabbed a wine bottle on the table and took a sip. "Really, let me, the parent, worry less." Looking at the backs of the crowd, although Carlos' ma was complaining, the smile on his face obviously betrayed him. "Go to his council." Looking at the complaint in his hand, Ma Karloff smiled disdainfully, and the paper in his hand suddenly burned. Luo Zhen rested his chin on his right hand, and couldn't help laughing as he watched the horseman Carlos operate. "President, this is the receipt for this entrustment, and I leave it to you." Immediately, Luo Zhen handed over the receipt of his entrustment this time to Mrs. Carlo, stretched and was about to leave. "Where are you going?" Seeing that Luo Zhen was about to leave again, the groom immediately shouted at Luo Zhen's back. I haven't been back for so long. Go home and have a look. Luo Zhen didn't look back, stretched out his arms and waved at the horseman behind him. Zeus and Prometheus floated on both sides of Luo Zhen's head, and their backs could not be seen for a while. Looking at the entrusted receipt in his hand, Ma Karloff smiled and put it away. Because Urza also went out to make a commission and has not returned yet. Luo Zhen couldn't find anything to eat at home, so he simply went back to the guild. Although night fell, the guild at this time was still very lively. Luo Zhen found a seat and sat down, looking at Kana, who was holding a barrel and drinking. Luo Zhen, has no one told you that it's impolite to keep staring at girls? Being stared at by Luo Zhen like this, Kana suddenly felt uncomfortable, and turned her head to Luo Zhen in displeasure and said, Ha ha ha, it's been a long time since I saw you drinking, and suddenly I fell in love with it. Luo Zhen scratched his head and laughed, took a bottle of wine from the bar and returned to the chair. Holding the wine bottle and waving at Kana, Kana pouted and raised the barrel at Luo Zhen. Cool. After taking a sip of wine, Luo Zhen exhaled heavily and couldn't help shouting. After eating a full meal in the guild, Luo Zhen walked home slowly in flip-flops. It is worth mentioning that after Luo Zhen became an S-class wizard, he could accept more commissions, and the amount also increased a lot. Soon I had a house of my own in Magnolia. The area of the house is quite large, and it is not far from the guild, which made Luo Zhen and Urza quite satisfied. Tonight Luo Zhen lay in bed very early and fell asleep. At home, Luo Zhen specially prepared a room for Prometheus and Zeus Napoleon. Although they don't need to sleep, Luo Zhen never treats them like slaves. On this day, Luo Zhen sat drinking in the guild as usual. Suddenly the door of the guild was kicked open. A pink-haired boy rushed into the guild yelling, Master, I'm back. And me. Along with his voice, everyone in the guild joked, Natsu and Happy are back. Welcome home. Natsu. Told you many times, don't kick the door. Looking at the dilapidated gate, Ma Karloff yelled at the pink-haired boy who walked in. I know, old man. Natsu grinned and didn't listen to Mr. Carlo's words at all. Hey, who are you? Newcomer. At this time, Natsu suddenly saw Luo Zhen, who was sitting in front of him yawning, and curiously approached Luo Zhen and asked. The people around were about to speak, but Luo Zhen raised his hand to stop them. Luo Zhen showed a harmless smile and said with a smile, Are you Natsu? I've heard of your name a long time ago. Hearing his name from Luo Zhen's mouth, Natsu burst out laughing proudly. Ha ha ha, has the reputation of my uncle spread? Looking at the proud and complacent Natsu, the surrounding members all looked at Natsu with the eyes of a fool. Thanks for watching. Please like and subscribe.